Sarah's hands trembled as she stared out the kitchen window, her coffee growing cold in her grip. The beautiful row of arborvitae plants her parents had carefully selected just last week lay scattered across the lawn like broken soldiers. Each one had been methodically hacked down, their green branches strewn everywhere, roots exposed and dying in the morning sun. The sight made her stomach turn. She'd helped plant those. She remembered her father's careful instructions about how deep to dig, her mother's excitement about finally having some privacy in this fishbowl of a neighborhood. Sarah had even taken photos of them standing proudly beside their new green wall, posting them with the caption, "New house, new beginnings." Now, those beginnings were scattered across the grass like shattered dreams. "Mom, Dad, you need to see this." Her voice cracked with disbelief. She heard her father's footsteps thundering down the stairs. He appeared in the kitchen doorway, still in his pajamas, his reading glasses perched on his head where he'd pushed them up in a hurry. Her mother was right behind him, tying her bathrobe closed. "What's wrong, sweetheart?" her mother asked, concern flooding her features. Then she looked out the window, and her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, no. They'd only been in this neighborhood for 3 weeks. The houses were crammed so close together that Sarah could literally see into their neighbor's kitchen from her bedroom window. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his tone suggesting he knew exactly why they were there and found it amusing. "You destroyed our plants," Robert said, his voice tight. "Every single one. $3,000 worth of landscaping." Marcus shrugged, his smirk widening. "Those plants were on my property," he declared smugly, not even pretending to feel remorseful. "I had every legal right to remove them. And if you plant anything there again, I'll be calling the authorities. Consider this your only warning." Sarah felt her mother's hand grip her shoulder. Linda was shaking, whether from anger or shock, Sarah couldn't tell. "Those plants were on our property," Robert said, his voice rising slightly. "We measured. The landscaping company measured. They were well within our property line. Your measurements were wrong," Marcus said with a dismissive way. "That whole strip is mine. Always has been. The previous owners knew it, and now you know it too. Maybe do your homework before you start planting things that aren't yours." "We have the property survey from when we bought the house," Linda interjected, her voice shaking. "It clearly shows." "I don't care what your paperwork says," Marcus interrupted, his smirk fading into something harder. Sarah helped her parents water the new plants every evening, hoping desperately that this nightmare was finally over. The plants were beautiful, thick and green, and full of promise. In a few years, they'd be tall enough to completely block the view of Marcus's house. Linda seemed lighter, happier, chatting about what other landscaping they might do in the backyard. It wasn't. 3 nights later, Sarah jolted awake to a horrifying sound. The unmistakable roar of a chainsaw ripped through the quiet darkness at 2 in the morning. For a moment, still foggy with sleep, she thought she was dreaming. Then the sound came again, harsh and violent, and she knew it was real. Her heart pounding, she ran to the window and couldn't believe what she saw. Marcus was out there in his pajamas and work boots, chainsaw buzzing violently as he tore through their brand new plants with deliberate, vengeful strokes. The security light from his garage illuminated the scene like some kind of nightmare stage play. He was methodical about it, cutting each plant at the base, then hacking the fallen trunk into smaller pieces. "Dad!" Sarah screamed. "Dad, he's doing it again." Her parents burst into her room, and Linda let out a sound that was half sob, half scream when she saw what was happening. Her father called the police immediately while her mother recorded everything on her phone, her hands shaking so badly the video came out blurry. Sarah stood at the window, tears streaming down her face, watching Marcus destroy their plants for the second time. She felt violated, like he was cutting into something that belonged to them, something personal. The chainsaw's roar seemed to go on forever. By the time the police arrived, Marcus had destroyed 6 of the 8 new plants. He was starting on the 7th when the red and blue lights appeared. When the officers arrived, Marcus had the audacity to turn off the chainsaw and smile at them. He tried playing innocent, claiming he'd simply made an honest mistake about the property boundaries. He was so sorry for the confusion, he said. He'd gotten confused in the dark. He thought these were the plants that were on his property. At 2 in the morning, one of the officers, a tired-looking woman with gray streaks in her dark hair, asked skeptically, "You decided to do landscaping at 2 in the morning?" "I couldn't sleep," Marcus said with a shrug. "Figured I'd be productive. I didn't realize what time it was." "Sir, your neighbors called us 3 nights ago about you destroying these same plants," the other officer, a younger man with a military haircut, said. "And now you're out here doing it again? Different plants, Marcus said smoothly, "These ones are on my property. I have a right to maintain my own land." The police weren't buying it, but they couldn't arrest him without definitive proof of where the actual property line existed. Sarah's father showed them the survey from their home purchase, the documentation from the landscaping company, the photos showing the measurements, and the orange spray paint marking the property line. Marcus had his own documents, apparently. He produced a hand-drawn map that he claimed the previous owner of his house had given him, showing that the strip of land extended to his property. It looked like something a child might draw, but he presented it with complete confidence. The officers looked at both sets of documents, then at each other, then at the destroyed plants. "Here's what's going to happen," the female officer said. "You're both going to hire a professional surveyor, someone neutral, to come out and establish exactly where the property line is. Until that happens, nobody touches anything in this disputed area. Not you," she pointed at Marcus, "and not you," she pointed at Robert. "Are we clear?" "Crystal," Robert said. Marcus just shrugged. "Fine by me. But when that surveyor confirms I'm right, I want compensation for my time and the harassment." Sarah wanted to scream. Her mother was crying quietly, her father's arm around her shoulders. They all stood outside in their pajamas at 2:30 in the morning, watching the police document the scene and take statements. After lengthy discussions with both families, Marcus finally agreed to hire a professional surveyor to settle the dispute once and for all. Actually, agreed was a strong word. The police strongly suggested that if he wanted to avoid charges for destruction of property, he should be cooperative about establishing the facts. Marcus seemed confident, almost cocky about it. Sarah suspected he genuinely believed he was right, or at least to convince himself he was. The next 2 weeks were agonizing. The destroyed plants lay where Marcus had left them, a constant reminder of the violation. The police had told them not to clean anything up until after the survey, in case they needed to document it further. So Sarah had to look at the carnage every day, the dead and dying branches turning brown, the exposed roots drying out in the sun. Her mother stopped opening the curtains on that side of the house. She lost weight, dark circles appearing under her eyes. She'd taken to drinking wine in the evenings, something Sarah had rarely seen her do before. Robert was constantly on the phone with lawyers, trying to understand their options, what they could do if the survey somehow went in Marcus's favor. School became Sarah's escape. At least there, she didn't have to think about Marcus and his chainsaw and his smug face. But even there, the situation followed her. Mia had told other friends, and soon everyone knew about the crazy neighbor war at Sarah's house. "Have you thought about just letting him have the land?" one girl, Jessica, asked at lunch. "Like, is it really worth all this stress?" Sarah had stared at her, anger flaring hot in her chest. "He destroyed $6,000 worth of plants. Twice. You think we should just let him get away with that?" "I'm just saying, sometimes it's easier to just move on," Jessica said with a shrug. Sarah didn't talk to Jessica much after that. The surveyor arrived on a crisp Thursday morning. Sarah had stayed home from school, claiming she felt sick. It wasn't entirely a lie. Her stomach had been in knots since she woke up, anxiety churning like a living thing inside her. This was it. This would settle everything, one way or another. The surveyor was a middle-aged man named Tom Chun, with wire-rimmed glasses and an air of professional competence. He arrived in a truck with his company logo on the side, accompanied by a younger assistant who carried most of the equipment. They had what looked like a sophisticated GPS device, measuring tapes, and stakes with bright orange flags. Sarah watched from her window as the man methodically measured, marked, and documented everything. He started at the street, finding the property markers that had been placed when the development was built. He used the GPS device, checked it against county records on a tablet, measured distances with a laser measure that beeped each time he took a reading. Marcus came out of his house, arms crossed, watching the proceedings. He was smiling, confident. He'd probably spent the last 2 weeks convincing himself that he was right, that his hand-drawn map from the previous owner was legitimate, that he'd been justified in destroying those plants. Sarah's father stood on their side, silent and tense. Linda was beside him, holding his hand so tightly her knuckles were white. Sarah joined them, unable to stay inside any longer. The surveyor worked for over 2 hours, checking and rechecking his measurements. He consulted his tablet frequently, cross-referencing with county records. He placed stakes at various points, each one marked with an orange flag. His assistant took photos of everything, documented every measurement. Finally, Tom Chin pulled out a roll of orange survey tape. This was it. This would show exactly where the property line ran. When he finally placed the orange survey tape, Sarah's mouth dropped open in shock. The tape ran 11 feet into Marcus's yard. Not just a little bit, not inches. 11 feet, nearly 12 feet. Actually, the surveyor said when pressed for exact numbers. The property line ran from the street back to the rear of the lots, and it was consistently 11 to 12 feet inside where Marcus's fence stood. His fence, his beautiful privacy fence that he'd been so proud of, that that Sarah could see from her window was completely on their property. Every single post, every single board. The whole thing from the street to the back of the lot. Sarah watched the color drain from Marcus's face as the surveyor explained the findings. Tom Chun was professional about it, showing both families the measurements, the GPS coordinates, the county records. There was no ambiguity, no room for interpretation. The property line was exactly where Sarah's parents had thought it was. Actually, it was even more in their favor than they'd realized. That can't be right, Marcus said, his voice shaking. That's impossible. I've had that fence up for 4 months. The previous owner told me. The previous owner gave you incorrect information, Tom said calmly. It happens sometimes. People make assumptions about property lines without actually checking the legal records. But according to the county survey and the GPS coordinates, this is definitely correct. I verified it 3 times. But my fence is on their property, Tom said, pointing at Sarah's family, by about 11 feet. The plants your neighbors installed were actually on their own property with room to spare. They could have planted them another 8 feet closer to your house and still been on their own land. Her father stood there with his arms crossed, saying absolutely nothing, but his expression spoke volumes. He didn't gloat. He didn't smile. He just nodded slowly, vindicated but taking no pleasure in Marcus's obvious distress. Marcus looked like he might be sick. He stared at the orange tape, following it with his eyes from the street all the way to the back of the properties. This has to be a mistake, he said again, but his voice had lost its conviction. I can have another surveyor come out if you'd like a second opinion, Tom offered, but I guarantee you they'll find the same thing. The county records are clear and the GPS coordinates don't lie. Marcus didn't say anything else. He just turned and walked back into his house, his shoulders slumped. The surveyor gave Sarah's father a detailed report, complete with maps, photos, and GPS coordinates. He also provided a letter that could be used in legal proceedings if necessary. The bill for his services was $1,200, which Marcus had agreed to pay as part of the arrangement with the police. That evening, Sarah's family sat around the kitchen table with the survey report spread out in front of them. Linda was crying, but this time they were tears of relief. Robert had opened a beer, something he rarely did on weeknights. So what happens now? Sarah asked. Her father took a long drink of his beer, then set it down carefully. Now he talked to a lawyer. Marcus destroyed over $6,000 worth of plants, twice. He did it maliciously on our property. We have video evidence, police reports, and now definitive proof that he was wrong about the property line. Are you going to sue him? Sarah asked. I don't want to, her father said. Lawsuits are expensive and time-consuming, but we need to be compensated for what he destroyed, and that fence needs to come down. It's on our property. Over the next 2 weeks, Marcus had to dismantle his entire fence himself. Sarah's father had been clear about that in the letter their lawyer sent. Marcus could remove the fence himself, or they would hire someone to remove it and bill him for the cost. Marcus chose to do it himself. Sarah could hear him cursing and hammering from sunrise to sunset. It was oddly satisfying, in a petty way she wasn't entirely proud of. She'd watch sometimes from her window as Marcus struggled with the posts he'd cemented into the ground. He'd built that fence to last, and now he was learning just how well he'd done his job. The surveyor's bill arrived shortly after, along with a legal demand for compensation for the destroyed plants. The landscaping company had provided a detailed invoice for both sets of plants, plus the cost of the additional survey work they'd done. The total came to nearly $10,000 when you included the surveyor's fee, the destroyed plants, and the cost of replanting. Marcus tried to negotiate. Sarah's father showed her the emails. Messages where Marcus alternated between apologetic and defensive, offering to pay half, then 2/3, then claiming he couldn't afford the full amount. Robert was unmoved. Their lawyer sent a formal demand letter, and Marcus eventually agreed to a payment plan. By the end of the month, Sarah's family had reclaimed their expanded property, installed beautiful new plants that were thriving peacefully, and finally achieved the privacy they desperately wanted. The new plants were placed well within their property line, but they also now had an additional 11 feet of space they hadn't realized was theirs. Linda was already planning a garden, talking about raised beds and a small patio area. Marcus barely made eye contact anymore when they passed on the street. His house looked naked without the fence exposed. Sarah had heard through neighborhood gossip that he was planning to move, that he couldn't afford to stay after the settlement. Harder felt bad about that, but mostly she felt relieved. One evening, about 6 weeks after the survey, Sarah was watering the new plants when she saw Marcus loading boxes into his car. He looked over at her, and for a moment, their eyes met. She expected anger or resentment, or that smug look he'd had before. Instead, he just looked tired and defeated. "I'm sorry," he called out suddenly. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I really thought I was right. Sarah didn't know what to say. She settled for a nod, then went back to watering. Her mother came out a few minutes later. Was that Marcus? Linda asked. Yeah, he apologized. Her mother stood there for a moment, looking at the plants, then at Marcus's house. I suppose everyone makes mistakes. He made the same mistake twice, Sarah pointed out. With a chainsaw, at 2 in the morning. Her mother laughed. A real laugh. The first one Sarah had heard from her in weeks. Fair point. But still, I'm glad it's over. I'm glad we can finally just live here, without all the drama. Sarah nodded, running her hand over the soft needles of the nearest arborvitae. These plants would grow tall and strong, creating the privacy wall her mother had dreamed of. And they'd do it on land that was definitely, legally, unmistakably theirs. Sometimes, Sarah thought, karma doesn't just knock on your door. Sometimes it brings a surveyor's tape and a very expensive lesson about respecting boundaries. Sometimes it takes weeks of stress and thousands of dollars and sleepless nights. But eventually, if you stand your ground and do things the right way, the truth comes out. Marcus moved out 2 months later. A nice family with 2 young kids moved in. Sarah's mother brought them cookies on their first day, and they all laughed together on the front lawn. The new neighbors loved the privacy plants, said they were exactly what they would have wanted themselves. Sarah watched from her window as the new family settled in, and for the first time since they'd moved to this cramped suburban neighborhood, she felt like they were actually home. If you enjoyed this story, like and subscribe for more.